This video is a historical reconstruction created using artificial intelligence based on records from the period.
On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic was moving through an Atlantic that was unusually calm. The sea was so smooth it produced no foam around the icebergs, erasing one of the few visual warnings of danger. When the ship struck the ice, there was no explosion and no immediate screams, only a brief vibration, followed by silence. For several critical minutes, almost no one understood what had just happened. Before panic, before chaos, there was a fatal pause of calm that sealed the Titanic's fate. Before we move into those decisive moments, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow this reconstruction based on historical records. The Titanic was making roughly 22 knots, a routine speed for crossings of that era. The absence of wind and waves removed the visual contrast that normally revealed icebergs at a distance. In the crow's nest, the lookouts relied entirely on the naked eye, without binoculars that night. Darkness made it difficult to separate ice from the horizon. On the bridge, officers held their course, confident in the reports received throughout the day. Evidence suggests the risk was underestimated by conditions that appeared favorable. Just before 11:40 p.m., a pale mass breaks the dark line of the horizon. The iceberg appears directly ahead of the Titanic, leaving little room to react. In the crow's nest, the warning is immediate. On the bridge, rapid orders are issued to change course and reduce speed. The rudder responds, and the propellers shift their rotation. Evidence indicates the maneuver began too late to prevent contact. The contact with the iceberg does not produce a violent crash. The Titanic's hull merely scrapes along the ice, creating a muted continuous vibration. Instead of a single impact, the sound travels like a long scratch along the ship's structure. Many passengers feel only a slight tremor beneath their feet. To most, the ship appears unharmed. The silence that follows reinforces the impression that nothing serious has occurred. After the contact, the Titanic continues forward without immediate interruption. No alarms are sounded and no audible orders are given to passengers. Many resume their conversations, interpreting the incident as trivial. In the corridors, routine continues almost unchanged. The crew, however, watches quietly, assessing subtle signs while waiting for confirmation. This calm interval extends the sense of normality on board. Minutes after the impact, officers and engineers descend to the lower compartments to assess the situation. On the lowest levels, water begins to enter steadily, without violent jets or dramatic noise. The advance is slow but constant. At first glance, the damage appears manageable. Pumps are activated and initial measurements are taken. The quiet nature of the flooding conceals the true severity of what is unfolding. With the confirmation of flooding, the watertight doors are activated from the bridge. Along the hull, large steel panels descend slowly, sealing off the affected compartments. The system works as designed, without visible failure. The process is quiet, almost discreet. For many crew members, the closing of the doors reinforces confidence in the ship's engineering. At that moment, containment still seems possible. With the watertight doors closed, life on board appears to continue normally. In the lounges, music plays on and passengers move without urgency. Many interpret the event as a minor navigational irregularity. The lighting remains steady and no public instructions are given. The absence of visible emergency signals sustains a sense of safety. Collective silence helps delay any serious reaction. As minutes pass, subtle signs begin to appear. The deck develops a barely noticeable tilt, sensed only by those who walk carefully. Loose objects slowly slide across smooth surfaces. Some passengers feel mild discomfort as they move. There are still no official explanations. The silence, once reassuring, begins to feel unsettling. Reports start reaching the bridge from the lower compartments. Messages indicate flooding in multiple sections, beyond what the original calculations anticipated. Engineers and officers exchange information in silence. Measurements show the water advancing progressively. Based on these data, it becomes clear the Titanic cannot remain afloat indefinitely. The seriousness of the situation begins to settle in. As reports are consolidated, command fully understands the gravity of the situation. Calculations show the ship will not stay afloat until morning. Even so, a decision is made to avoid alarming passengers immediately. Preparations begin quietly, following maritime protocols of 1912. Every decision is made in silence, grounded in technical data and naval experience. If you want to keep following this faithful historical reconstruction, subscribe to the channel and continue through these decisive moments. With the decision made, internal orders circulate through the ship's departments. Crew members receive clear instructions, delivered discreetly and with organization. Emergency equipment is prepared away from the main lounges. Nothing is rushed or made visible to passengers. Discipline on board reflects the maritime training of the era. The goal is to buy time without causing unnecessary alarm. As the North Atlantic water advances through the lower compartments, cold begins to spread through the hull. Temperatures drop rapidly on the lowest decks. Crew members feel the thermal shock as they move through metal corridors and narrow stairways. Constant contact with icy water makes the work more difficult. Even so, tasks continue with discipline. The cold becomes another silent indicator of how serious the situation has become. With the water advancing, the Titanic's list becomes noticeable to more passengers. The uneven floor is felt while walking through corridors and staircases. Objects must be adjusted to keep them from sliding. Quiet questions are directed at stewards and attendants. The answers are restrained and reassuring. There is still no panic, only a growing awareness that something is not right.
The quarantines. Why keep them for historic camp scenes? Yeah, fine at the front.
Without public announcements, lifeboat preparations begin on the upper decks. Canvas covers are carefully removed and set aside. Ropes are arranged and checked by hand. The wooden lifeboats, standard for navigation in 1912, are positioned for immediate use. Everything happens in a controlled manner, with no visible haste. Discretion is meant to preserve calm as available time slips away. In the radio room, operators maintain continuous transmission using the Marconi system, the standard technology of 1912. Distress calls are sent repeatedly to nearby ships. The Titanic's electrical power remains active, lighting decks and lounges. From a distance, the ship still appears stable and fully operational. This steady illumination reinforces a false sense of control. For many, the real danger is still not obvious. As time moves on, the initial silence begins to break. Short commands are exchanged more frequently between decks. The crew's pace visibly changes. Rushed footsteps echo through corridors that were calm moments earlier. Activity intensifies, still without public alarm. The sound of organized movement replaces the quiet that followed the impact. With time passing, the change becomes impossible to ignore. The Titanic's bow sinks visibly below the horizon line. The list can now be seen with the naked eye from the upper decks. Water advances internally, reaching areas that were previously dry. The ship's apparent stability begins to fade. For experienced crew members, there is no longer any doubt. In response to the visible changes, passengers begin to be directed across the decks. Movement is controlled with crew guiding small groups. There is no mass rush. The instruction is to remain calm and follow simple orders. This collective relocation marks a new phase of the night. The situation shifts from observation to coordinated action. The first wooden lifeboats are lowered into the sea from the upper decks. Many leave without full capacity, a result of early caution and the lack of perceived urgency. The process unfolds in an orderly manner, without shouting or open confusion. As the boats descend, the silence on board grows heavier. Passengers and crew watch with restrained anticipation. The weight of the moment begins to take hold. As lifeboat preparations continue, the orchestra remains active on deck. The music serves a practical purpose, helping to maintain calm among passengers. Familiar melodies contrast with the growing tilt of the ship and the cold night air. This is not a performance, but emotional containment. The sound fills the space left by the absence of clear explanations. The contrast makes the situation even more striking to those who pay close attention. In the early morning hours, the Titanic's electrical system begins to fail on the lower decks. Lights flicker and go out in compartments that were once illuminated. The ship's operation becomes irregular, affecting pumps and internal communications. Darkness spreads unevenly, increasing tension among crew and passengers. Concerned expressions give way to restrained desperation. The gradual loss of power reveals that technical control is slipping away. As the night wears on, the Titanic's angle steepens at an alarming rate. The hull is subjected to stresses it was never designed to endure. Metallic sounds echo from different parts of the ship, cracks and groans caused by internal pressure. The list makes movement difficult and compromises internal structures. Crew members recognize the signs of imminent collapse. The remaining time becomes critically short. In the final minutes of control, the crew tries to buy time wherever possible. Orders are given directly now, without concern for maintaining appearances. The last wooden lifeboats are rushed into position on the slanted decks. Every action demands extra effort due to the ship's angle. The atmosphere is charged with urgency and extreme tension. The shared feeling is that only moments remain. With control definitively lost, the silence that marked the early moments vanishes. Panic spreads rapidly through decks and corridors. Containment is no longer possible, and sound takes over the environment. Screams, running footsteps, and overlapping orders echo across the tilted ship. The night fills with the noise of human desperation and physical struggle. The Titanic enters its final phase, defined by the collapse of order. In the final moments, the Titanic reaches an extreme angle it cannot sustain. The ship's structure is subjected to forces beyond its design limits. The hull breaks apart, separating into two main sections. Within minutes, both disappear beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The intense noise that dominated the scene stops abruptly. Silence returns, this time absolute. After the Titanic vanishes, the North Atlantic returns to an unsettling stillness. Wooden debris floats across the dark surface, scattered where there was once light and movement. Survivors wait in absolute silence, gathered in wooden lifeboats, exposed to the freezing night. There are no more commands, no music, no machines, only the distant sound of water. The sea regains the same calm that came before the tragedy.